Yeah, so today we're kind of going to go over the physical side of field hockey. But I think before I get started is just kind of those that don't know me, just a little bit of background. So I'm a field hockey player. I've gone through probably very similar pathways to what you guys are going through or have gone through. So I started playing when I was 8 in the spring league. I played in school. I also played with the regional and provincial teams. I went on to, I was fortunate enough to get a full scholarship down to the States and play hockey down there for 4 years. And I also did a little bit of a stint in Europe playing in the top league in Scotland. And now I still play. I love the game. I'm never not going to play, but I would say it's maybe less competitive and more social, more tournaments. And but I love the game. And then I'm a coach as well. So I've been coaching since I was my first gig was when I was 15, and I was a little under 8s. You always kind of remember your first team that you coach, and I've been involved in the Futures, USA Futures program. I both coach at the club level and regional, provincial level, and in some schools. So that's kind of my field hockey background. And then my career, which is where I work mostly, as a bachelor's of science in exercise physiology and a master's of strength and conditioning. And so my career has kind of focused more on the physical side of training athletes. I've worked with multiple different sports and multiple different organizations, and I would probably say in the last 8 years, I've kind of been more focused in that high performance national and international level athletes. But I've had numerous roles of strength and conditioning coach, sports scientist, trainer, physical preparation coach, whatever it may be, but it's always been in the role of the physical side. So that's a little bit about me, to see who's talking to you today. Field hockey, why we're all here, why we all love the game. So when I look at field hockey, I kind of break it down into kind of four pillars. You've got your technical and tactical, which technical is kind of looking at your ball handling skills, your elimination skills, descriptions, and what you go and do on the hockey pitch itself. And then the tactical, so this is kind of your game strategy, what the game formation that you play, your defensive, attacking concepts and set pieces. And then you've got another pillar of the psychological side. So for me, this is mental skills. This is how you prepare mentally for the game. It can affect, your mood, the stress, the nervousness, how you prepare, irritability, and so all that kind of the mental side of how you approach the game. And then what we're going to talk about today is the physical side. So for me, this is I love being able to combine everything. So my passion of hockey, and then also what I'm also passionate about is how the body moves and how we can help the body become faster, stronger, more powerful, healthy, make sure we're injury free so that we can play the game we love. So we're going to talk predominantly today on the physical side. So the key kind of takeaways of today is kind of understanding, the demands of the game. So kind of giving you some examples of actually what does the physical demands of hockey entail. Looking at physical traits of a field hockey player. So what is that, how can you as a player in yourself, what can you work on? And then giving you some just kind of physical training that helps your performance and why that is. And then we'll kind of get into how to fuel your body for performance, which is another key factor of kind of the physical sphere. So physical demands in field hockey. So when we look at the game of hockey, and when I look at it from my perspective, I kind of break it into like 5 different elements. So the first one is total distance. So when the whistle goes at the start of your game and you start to walk, jog, run, sprint, and then when the whistle ends at the end of the game, how much distance have you covered in that entire match? And we kind of use that to kind of evaluate, how hard that game was, what was the load that was impacted into when you went through that game. So that gives us an overall element of the game itself. We then look at different velocities. So I'm sure if you can close your eyes and remember the last time you were on field, which I'm sure was now a long time ago, but during the game, there are times where you are just standing still. There are games where you're walking, there are games where you're jogging, running, and sprinting. So all these different movements are happening all over the field. So this is kind of, for us, we look at how much time is kind of spent in each game, which then gives us an overall perspective of how physical the game. So if there was a lot of times that you were maybe standing and walking around, maybe that's just due to the level of competition or the game itself, but it gives us an overall idea of what that demand was. We then look at sprint distance. So a lot of the high impact plays that happen within field hockey is due to some sort of acceleration or dynamic movement. So we like to look at the sprint distance. So this can be, so how fast you run can also, well, the faster you run, the farther distance you're going to cover. You can also look at how many sprint efforts you do within the game. And then we look at like adding up all those sprint efforts and what is that total distance that you covered, which is just, a pretty key impact. If you have a game where you're probably covering, 400 meters of sprint distance, that to me is a pretty high and intense game. So whether that be like the team that you were playing was pretty equal to you and there was a lot of transitional hockey going forward and backward, that would kind of give us an example of what that demand was for that game. And then the last ones are heart rate. So that's more of it's an internal measure of just how hard your heart rate worked at like maximum. So what was the maximum your heart was beating at a certain point during the game, looking at the average, and then looking at the different zones and the minutes that your heart rate was spent in each zone. So in heart rate, you have 5 zones. So today, like what we're doing right now, we're all probably in zone 1. We're resting, we're not exposing any energy, we're very relaxed. And the zone 5 is when you're like sprinting up and down a field and your heart rate is through the max and you're in that zone. And then lastly is looking at positional differences. So comparing midfield forwarders, defenders, and what their demands of the game. So that's kind of just a little bit of an overview of what the demands of the game are. So I'm interested now to see if you guys know what some of the demands are of the game. So just out of curiosity, I'm just going to give you kind of 2, option A or option B. So for total distance, how much do you think in a 60-minute game, in an international game, so you're thinking of our Canadian national team, how much distance do they cover? Do you think they cover A, 4 to 6 kilometers, or B, 7 to 9 kilometers? So if you think A, let's get a thumbs up. So A is 4 to 6 kilometers. Do you think a typical distance in a 60-minute game is 4 to 6? So anyone think A? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay. Anyone else? Nice. Got a couple of you. Okay. And then, okay, B. Who thinks it's 7 to 9? 7 to 9. Cool. All right. Awesome. Okay, so my next question, I'm going to give you the answers in a bit. And the next question that I have for you is, how much time do you think, so if you had 100%, how much time out of 100 do you feel that you are participating in like high intensity work? So I'm going to give you 3 options. Option A would be below 10%. Option B would be above 10%, or option C would be above 15%. So think if it's below 10%, put a hands up, and this is 60-minute game international play. So below 10%, any takers there? Above 10%? Above, okay, we got a few there for the 10, okay, and above 15%. All right, cool. Okay, and then my last question is, when we're looking at positions, and this is again, I'm thinking international level players, so our national team players that are playing against Holland or Germany or Australia, what position do you think covers the most distance in a game? Do you think it's A, forwards, B, midfielders, or C, defenders? So if I go with A, forwards, any takers there? Okay, we got one, nice. B, midfielders, and C, defenders. All right, okay, cool. I'm just gonna close that down. Okay, cool. So that's interesting to kind of see where your perceptions are. You might be surprised. But here's some key facts for you. So, interestingly enough, our game has changed. So we have done from many years the 2 halves, which equals 70 minutes. And then in 2014, the introduction of the 4-quarter game was introduced. And it's been really fascinating over the last 5-6 years to kind of evaluate how those differences has changed. So looking at the total distance covered, there's actually in the 60-minute game a lot less distance covered. So those that answered 4 to 6 kilometers, you were correct in thinking that for the international game. But in that 7 to 9 kilometer mark was seen as more in that 70-minute game. So that's how it's changed within the 4 quarters. Velocity, so that's when we're looking at like a low velocity is like you're standing and walking. Your medium velocity is looking at like running and jogging. And then your high velocity is looking at your sprints, your repeated sprints and stuff like that. So interestingly, again, our sport is an intermittent sport, but predominantly we're in kind of that moderate to low kind of velocity. And it's those impact moments where we see the intense efforts. So in the 60-minute game, it's actually, that has kind of been one of the biggest differences, is that there's more high intensity efforts within that 60-minute game. So those that answered above 10% were correct in that 60-minute game, that there's 12% of our game is presented in that high velocity, versus prior in the 2 halves was less than 5%, which I think is just fascinating. And then looking at sprint distance. So again, this is like adding up all this high intensity efforts that accumulate over the game. And this is another big one with the difference between the 2 halves and the 4 quarters, is there's actually a lot more sprint distance that is happening. So there's more repeated sprint efforts, there's more high intensity work that is happening in that 4-quarter game versus our 70 minutes. The heart rate is pretty much the same for both games. So it is that average of 85% or above. So that's in that kind of zone 4 of zone 4 heart rate. Change of direction is, I thought, really interesting as well, is that it is suggested that change of direction happens every 5.5 seconds. So you are, it's not just a linear sport. You are moving all over the place, diagonal, left, right, backwards, left, right, to the left. You're constantly changing, which is a pretty big demand of the game to be able to do those movements. And then lastly is just looking at the sprint. So potentially how many number of sprints are you doing per match? Suggested between 17 and 30. And then in the international side, this was really interesting from a study from Australia. They looked at repeated sprint measures. So this is when you sprint and then you jog, you sprint and then you jog, and you sprint and you jog. So 3 consecutive sprints in a row, and the time between each sprint was like less than 21 seconds. And they recorded that this happened in the game about 17 times. So that's a pretty high demand there. So that just hopefully gives you an indication of kind of overall what the physical demands of the game are, to give you kind of some insights that, how we can, obviously we want this to be able to transfer onto the sport, onto the field, the technical, tactical, that's, number one, but these are some of the things that happen of the game. So hopefully that's, is interesting to you guys. And then lastly is the positional differences. So this is interesting in regards to the 70-minute versus the 60-minute. So midfielders tend to, on both sides, there's repeated sprint efforts and there's more speed, repeated speed different distance there. But it is said that lower level hockey, so maybe more club level, midfielders tend to cover more distance, or domestic style hockey. Lower level hockey covers more distance. Forwards is the same in both. They both have lots of high intensity efforts, lots more max sprint than the other two positions. And then defenders, there is more low intensity efforts, but interestingly, in the 60-minute game when the international, they're actually the ones that are covering more distance. Which I think is quite interesting if you're thinking about, what type of position you like to play and maybe what kind of physical traits you might need to work on if you want to play in that position. So if you're a midfielder, you need to be able to do a lot of repeated sprint efforts, especially as you're kind of into that transitional play. If you're a forward, you may need to work on your sprinting technique and high intensity efforts so you can get into that circle, receive that pass up the line or whatever it might be. And then defenders, as you progress through the levels, you actually need to have a pretty good aerobic system, which we'll talk about in a bit, just so that because you are maybe joining the attack, but then you got to be able to get back as well. So it just gives you an idea of the positional differences that you can, think about when you're thinking of what kind of position you fit to or would like to play. So that is the demand. So now we're going to look at the physical player profile. So this is kind of breaking it down a little bit from the overall demands to now just kind of the physical player profile. So I got all these from Instagram. You guys put up some great stuff on social media of you guys playing, and I love it. When we look at this player, there's a lot of things that we can look at from the physical side of things. So firstly is the hockey is played in a really weird position, right? We have half a stick, we're bent over, and sometimes we're even further bent over if we're doing like a sweep pass. So there is a lot of what we call abnormal postural requirements and a lot of spinal loading because we're bent over in this position. So this is really important to think about when we're working on our physical training of how to make sure that we make sure that we're not getting injured or we're not getting pulled muscles due to this actual how the game is played. Next is lower body strength. This shouldn't be a big surprise. Hockey players need to have strong lower body. Quads, hamstrings, glutes, these are really important muscle groups that help us be able to play the game. We're already playing in that kind of crouch position, so our legs need to be a good base of support. It also helps us make sure that we can execute the technical elements of the skill, so good hard push passes, sweeps, being able to sprint and accelerate, change direction, as we said, like you're changing directions every 5 to 5 seconds. So if you don't have good, strong muscles to be able to absorb that demand, the higher risk of potential for injury. So that's really important. Lower body or upper body strength, forearm, back, shoulders. This is really important. We carry a hockey stick, so we have to be able to have a good, strong upper body to be able to have more powerful shots on net. Make sure your tackles are secure. You're not getting broken through or run over through a strong, tackle, as well as sweep passes, and be able to receive that ball and absorb that force. So that's those three. Next is mobility and flexibility. So hockey players, we are tight in our hip T-spine. So T-spine is kind of like your mid-back, your quad, and your hamstrings. Like I'm sure if you've ever had an injury, it is probably one of those places. So mobility and flexibility, and again, it's just the nature of the sport. We're bent over, so all those things like our hip flexors, they're constantly scrunched. Our hamstrings are constantly elongated because we're bent over. So it's really important that becomes a part of your routine. Mobility and flexible, that's going to keep you healthy. That's going to keep you available to play. Core strength, again, this shouldn't be a surprise. We the core strength is also, don't just think of it as your abs, it's 360 around your entire body. And what happens normally if you have like I've had players that, oh, their low back is really sore. So what's happened is that your core actually isn't strong. And what's happened is that it started to go to your low back. So core strength is really important. So we make sure that we don't utilize the wrong muscles when we're playing the game, especially when we're playing this game in a really weird, unorthodox position. And then lastly is rotational power. So I know, like coaching with Andrea, you know, that ability to transfer from left to right when you're producing like a technical push or sweep or hit, that rotational power is really important, and that is generated through, through the kinetic chain, but predominantly through that hip and T-spine position. So those are kind of like key areas what we look at from the physical player. So if there's any area that you see here that you think you might need to work on that I've mentioned today, then those are kind of the key perspectives of the physical element of the player. Now we're going into the energy system. So this one, I'm trying to keep it really simple. We basically got two energy systems that our body uses to be able to run, sprint, jog, stand, walk, and all the elements of hockey. So we've got our aerobic energy system and our anaerobic energy system, which I'm pretty sure you guys have all heard of. Aerobic energy system is, where we utilize oxygen as our main energy fuel. So this is something where we can sustain efforts over long periods of time. So an example of that is that if you're playing the full game of hockey of 60 or 70 minutes, you need to be able to play that full game of 60 or 70 minutes, and that at the end of the last minute, you're not able to join the play because you're too tired to get up there. So that's important. And additional to what I think a lot of people don't realize is that you're having a good aerobic system actually helps with your recovery. So it helps flush out any of the bad toxins that are produced during when you're playing sports. And it also helps decrease your heart rate. So an example here is, I always remember, like, if your teammate has broken away the defense and you need to join her and you're at the 50-yard line and you need to join her to create a 2-on-1 into the circle, that's a hard effort. Your heart rate's up to the roof. Okay, you get an outcome of a penalty corner and you're the insert. If your heart rate is like going through the roof, the ability to perform that technical skill of a short corner, and the insert is, it starts it off. So if you mess up, then that potentially short corner is out the window. So having a good aerobic system to, decrease that heart rate, get that breathing rate down, and then be able to execute the skill of the pull out to the battery at the top, you're then able to hopefully get a successful outcome. So moving on to the anaerobic system. So I've broken it up into two parts. So you've got an anaerobic power portion, and then you've got an anaerobic capacity. So an anaerobic power is looking at efforts that are less than 10 seconds. So you see this all over the field of, like, it's a quick draw right and it's a pass. That's less than 10 seconds. Or it's the acceleration to close down your engagement distance and apply pressure. So those are types of examples of an aerobic power. And then aerobic capacity are those sprint efforts that last between 10 and 120 seconds. So building your capacity to be able to do those types of efforts is extremely important in the game of hockey. As we mentioned before in the demands, there is a lot more sprint efforts in this new style of game. So having that good anaerobic capacity really helps you with that piece. So training adaptation. So what can you guys do to help you with the physical side of hockey? So for me, it is strength training. So strength training helps in a number of different ways. First and foremost, for me, it helps reduce injuries. So being able to recruit the correct muscles, being robust enough, especially as you progress in the level of hockey. So if you're playing club right now, say you move up in league, so you go from like Div 3 to Div 2 or Div 2 to Div 1 as you progress, the training intensity or the game becomes a little bit more intense. Same if you go from club to provincial hockey or provincial to next gen to the senior team, having a good base of strength training is really going to help you not only in your performance on the game, but also helps reduce injuries. It also helps with your motor skills and coordination and muscle fire recruitment, and it aids in speed. So if you have no muscles if you have a lack of strength, you have less muscle fibers, right? So speed is a powerful movement, and so when someone is fast, they have a lot more muscles that they can recruit from to be able to accelerate, decelerate, change direction, and max speed. So that's something that I think is quite important in the game of hockey, just so that you're able to play at the best of your ability. The next one is, I'm thinking, no surprise, is speed training. So again, as mentioned, the game has progressed into a lot more high intensity efforts, a lot more speed. I always remember I had a coach, and they said, speed kills. If you can be a pretty impactful player if you're fast. And so speed is another element of something to include within your training. So, and that includes, as I mentioned, hockey is a multi-directional sport, but linear speed, acceleration, being able to decelerate and change direction with speed is important. Then you add your hockey stick, and then you add a ball. So there's all these different factors that can aid with your speed training to help you be a more successful player on pitch and have a more impact and more successful outcomes. And then lastly is the conditioning training. So again, I think I've touched on it before. It's really important to develop your aerobic capacity, and it helps reduce the levels of fatigue, especially when you're playing lots of hockey and your oxygen levels are able to come through and clear away in your bloodstream and clear away all that kind of bad toxic kind of I guess micro elements that kind of affect your ability to contract the muscles to contract. And then it also increases recovery time. So high intensity efforts during training a match, and then in between training sessions and game, you'll recover faster if you have a better aerobic engine. And then, as I mentioned, it just faster clearance of accumulation of lactates, which I'm sure you guys have all experienced. If you haven't played hockey before or in a while, and you go to your first training, most likely you're going to be sore because you're using muscles that you probably haven't used in a while. So a good aerobic system allows you to clear that a little bit faster, and again, recovery. So just thought I would open it up. That's just like the physical side. We're going to go into kind of more the energy of performance. Does anyone have any questions from that little piece that I just chatted about? Is there any questions? I'll check the chat box. Nothing's come in. Is there any questions before I go on? Hopefully that wasn't too much. We're all good. You can put up your hand and I can call you, or if not, I can continue on. Don't be shy. All good. Okay. All right. You guys are too shy. That's okay. Oh, okay. Phoenix. Awesome. What's your question? Do you have a question, Phoenix?
Oh, no, I don't have a question.
You're just giving me a thumbs up? Awesome.
Yeah.
I love the support. Okay. So gonna move on to, I'm just gonna close this down. Seconds. Okay, so nutrition. So this is, and be a disclaimer, I'm not a nutritionist or a sports dietitian. So if you're looking for like actual specifics then I would really suggest that I can provide you with some excellent sports dietitians and nutritionists, but I'm just gonna go over just a bit of an overview. But yeah, just wanted to get that first before I go into it. So nutrition for performance is how I look at nutrition. I've always been an athlete my entire life, and I use, food is a fuel of how I go about making sure that I can be the best that I can when I'm performing. And if I have a lack of fuel, I'm not going to be able to perform. So I'm going to go through, good nutrition versus poor nutrition and how that actually affects your body and your performance. And I'm sure you guys have heard this, but I'll just briefly go through some nutritional basics. We'll go over timing of when to eat, and then just quickly go over a review of hydration. So how proper nutrition can help you. So there's a lot of things that when you're eating well and correctly and having, the best sources of food, it actually helps you more than just your performance, but it all aids towards your performance. So first and foremost, well, it fuels your performance. It allows you to be able to meet the demands of the game that we just talked about so that you can execute the technical and tactical skills. It also helps with your sleep. It also speeds up recovery and training for competition. It supports your mental function. Like I know when I was in school and if I was in my last class before the end of the school and I hadn't eaten to lunch, I definitely knew that I was not as focused. I couldn't pay attention. And one of those things was I was hungry and I hadn't had my snack and I couldn't pay attention to what the teacher was saying. So that helps in that part. As well as it helps you repair, rebuilds, and maintains, cell and body tissue. So that's really important for when you're training, especially if you're training, lots, different multi-sports. This helps repairs and rebuilds. And then obviously it helps with your internal organs as well. When we look at poor nutrition, this is when you're not eating the highest quality of food. There are things that obviously can affect. So obviously we're talking about performance, so there is a decline in performance, whether it be you're not having enough substance within your daily intake, or it's not actually the right foods. It's the maybe more unhealthy options that can decline your performance. It also, it can be if you don't have a well balanced and you're eating, not having enough maybe vitamins or micronutrients, it can lead to risk of injury and illness. Definitely doesn't allow you to recover properly. You could be constantly tired. You could have issues with your menstrual cycle, mood changes, internal digestive, intestinal issues, and potentially long-term effects. So it could lead to, diabetes or osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is your bone health, and as we get older, unfortunately, your bones become less strong. So that's a factor of that. So that's kind of why we always want to try and choose and eat as healthily as we can especially when we're athletes and playing a lot of sport. So just going over the basics of nutrition, which I know you guys have probably heard about in your school and class. So we have micronutrients, which is your carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And then we have your macro carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and then your micro, which is your vitamins and minerals, and then your fluid intake of hydration and water. So just briefly, we'll go over kind of carbohydrates. So for me, carbohydrates is it's the most important fuel for energy during training and matches. It fuels you. It's one of that big source that helps you there. And commonly what we explain as carbohydrates is your breads, pasta, grains, noodles, and rice. But as you can see in this picture, there's a lot of other elements that can help with carbohydrates. So especially those that might be gluten tolerant or have some gluten tolerance, there are other options that can help you with with that, so you actually get the most fuel for your body. So there's fruits there's some nuts, there's dried fruits, all that sort of stuff that helps you fuel your body as the main kind of energy source. And if you have a lack of that, you start to feel tired, and that's when unfortunately your performance starts to decrease. Proteins, this is a really big one for building muscle, repairing tissues, protecting the immune system, regulating your body functions and your metabolic pathways. So protein is a really good one for recovery, especially every time you do a sport or you go for a run or you have a training session, your muscles on a micro level are all breaking down. Because they're being contracted and they're being used repetitively. So what the protein does when you ingest it, it comes out and helps kind of start to rebuild those muscles that have been kind of broken down in that micro level, as well as repair those tissues. So it's a really important macronutrient to help with that process, especially after a really hard training session. And examples of that are simply dairy, meat, poultry, and fish are kind of like the major ones. So those that don't maybe like the meat options, there's definitely other options from the vegetarian aspect as well. So almonds, kidney beans, black beans, chickpea seeds, tofu, lentil, hummus, avocado, and broccoli are all other options of good quality proteins there. And then the last one is your fats. So unfortunately, with like mainstream media, fats kind of always seem to have a negative connotation in regards to, you know, can't eat fats. And actually, there's some really good fats that are extremely good for you, and they do help with performance. So specifically, it helps improve like your strength, power, and endurance. It helps with your nervous system. It actually helps if you have inflammatory. Helps with reduction of inflammation. It promotes glycogen storage, so helps the carbohydrates store. So for energy, reduces fat storage and lowers your cholesterol. So there are some really good fats. So, you know, and there are also some really bad fats as well, which are kind of more the junk food and unhealthy. But good fats are like salmon, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, rapeseed oil, chicken, turkey, avocados. Those are all kind of good fats that you should include within your meal plans and daily intake. But obviously there is those bad fats, that cookies and chocolate cake, French fries and muffins, that are not the good fats, and that you don't necessarily want to refrain from eating those all the time. So, and the micronutrients, so these are also really important because they help like the immune system. They do aid in helping with your energy system. They help with like oxygen transfer and delivery. So when we're talking about our aerobic capacity and the oxygen coming around and trying to clear away the lactate that you might have accumulated, these type of micronutrients help with bone health and tissue repair. So all really important elements for our body so that we can maximize our performance. So again, these are examples of all your vitamins, your calcium, your iron, your magnesium. So calcium, I think, is really important for bone health, especially if you're an athlete that is still growing. This helps make sure the bones stay nice and strong. Iron, typically in females, there is a possibility that we have some athletes have low iron, and when you have low iron, you tend to sometimes get more fatigue. So making sure that there's good amounts of iron within your macronutrients, which helps aid that perspective. So hopefully that all made sense. Hopefully there was nothing new. So you might be thinking, why do I have this Ferrari car on my diagram? So I kind of, when I talk about eating performance, I kind of relate it to, you know, a really expensive car. And if you went to the gas station, would you fill this expensive car with really bad gas or petrol? Probably not, because that means that car is probably not going to run as well, and it's not going to explode. It's not going to be, you know, be able to go fast. It's going to kind of break down. And so I kind of relate that to your body being a Ferrari. If you put, you know, unhealthy options, then your body is not going to be able to perform. You're not going to be able to recover. You're not going to be able to run as fast, potentially last along a game. So you always want to try and think about when you're looking at nutrition, is looking at the best options to fuel your body. So, you know, the Ferrari, you're going to go to the gas station and you're going to put the premium top of the line fuel in it, because that's going to make it run the best that it can. And that's the same as I revert it to your body. So that's something to think about, that when you're looking at you know, what you're eating on a daily basis, to make sure when you're an athlete, you want to have the best type of food going into you so that you can perform to your best ability. So when is the best time to fuel your body for performance? So again, I reverted to the car analogy. as a fuel gauge. So when you eat a meal, your fuel gauge is full, right? But say you, but as the day goes by, if you don't fill that fuel gauge, your fuel tank is going to go slowly start to drop. Or if you've just played a hard, intense game and you started the game at full, but now you're at empty, you still need to make sure that you top up. So it's constantly about topping up your fuel and energy store as you report to the gauge. I know when I'm driving, if I'm on empty, I'm really nervous. I need to find a gas station. I need to fill up quickly so that I don't, I don't run out of gas and I don't run out of energy. So it's the same with your body. You want to make sure that you're always topping up to make sure that you have enough energy to be able to perform on the field and do the best that you can. So that's kind of how I look at when we're looking at when's the best time to fuel your body if you've got a game or a training session coming up. So I keep it really simple. If you have training and you need to make sure, or a game, you need to make sure that you have your main meal, which is high in carbohydrates, has some protein, has some fats, is about 3 to 4 hours before the main event. And then you want to make sure, because obviously that's a long time, your fuel gauge is going to drop a little bit. So you want to top it up with a snack, maybe anywhere between 1.5 and 2 hours before. Sometimes players have a really fast metabolism and they digest their food really quickly. So they may need to have like another snack, maybe an hour before, 30 minutes, to make sure that you're just topping up that fuel gauge. During training or during a match, it's really important that you have fluids, or if you need to have high glycemic foods. And what high glycemic foods are is like foods that can be quickly absorbed in your body to, again, top up that fuel gauge. In addition, like if you have a high metabolism and you break down food really quickly, and most young players do, that you'll need to maybe have a sports drink that has a little bit of more carbohydrates in it, or gel and bars, that just make sure that fuel gauge is constantly being topped up so that you're not getting close to empty. And then post-training, this is when we start to recover. So food, as I mentioned, proteins really help in aiding your recovery. So we'll have a snack. We call it like the 20-minute period. So have a snack at like that 15 to 30 minutes. So right after you're done your training, make sure you get something in you so you can start to recovery process a little bit quicker. And then if you can, try and have that meal 1 to 2 hours after. So it's just about the post-training nutrition is about starting and ingesting those nutrients that can help with the recovery process. So the next day or in a few days, you can still, you're able to, still play at the best of your ability. So hopefully that makes sense. The hydration piece is, again, a really important element for athletes to make sure that you're constantly staying hydrated. My rule of thumb is, make sure you're drinking 30 to 35 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per day. So that's like 14 to 17 milliliters per pound. So if you can figure out how much you weigh, then make sure you're allowing that amount of hydration per day. Don't wait till you're thirsty. If you're thirsty, it's actually too late. You're probably you're already dehydrated. And then in your day-to-day, always carry a water bottle. I'm sure you've probably heard this many times before from your coaches, but your cell phone is probably an extension of your arm. Make your water bottle an extension of your arm as well in the other hand. So you're constantly sipping throughout the day so that when you hit training at night with your club team, you're not dehydrated. And then obviously what aids in dehydration is, fizzy and sugary and caffeinated drinks. So try and avoid those, especially if you've got a big training session in the evening, and just try to keep a water bottle with you throughout the day and take small sips. Just for your interest, signs of dehydration are, there's a number of them, but the most predominantly ones are, you're more tired. You have a dry mouth or you're thirsty, you maybe have a headache, you get dizzy, your muscles start to cramp, you feel weak, and the one that you can actually tell that you're dehydrated is that if you have dark urine. So if you go to the bathroom and your pee is like an orange, or it's not an opaque yellow, it's more dark yellow or dark orange, that probably means that you're dehydrated. And so you want to make sure that you get out of that quickly, because it's going to, affect your performance. So lastly, my key takeaways for you from the nutrition part of thing is plan. I think if you can, be in part of your family discussions when you're talking to your mom or dad or whoever the person that is purchasing the food for the week. Be a part of that process. Get involved. Go and help with your mom or dad or whoever's going to do the shopping to help them purchase the food and maybe choose what sort of vegetables or fruit or chicken or protein or whatever that you want to have in your meal, and be a part of that process, as well as be a part of the process of help cooking. I think the earlier you can start being part of that process, the better understanding you'll have of what helps fuel your body and what works for you. So have that piece, plan that piece, and then plan what you're eating, especially if you've got a big tournament on the weekend. What are you doing in the days prior to that to ensure that your body is constantly being topped up with that fuel gauge? And then secondly is bring snacks. As I mentioned, as athletes, you're very active, very active. You got to make sure that you're, again, topping up that fuel gauge. So constantly have some sort of snack in your sports bag or your backpack during school, during training, just to make sure that you don't get to empty and you're constantly topping up. And then the last one is balance. So as we talked about the micronutrients and macronutrients, just make sure when you're looking at the plate that you're making sure it's a well-balanced meal. You've got your proteins, you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your fats, you've got food that has good sources of vitamins and micronutrients as iron and calcium. So make sure that that is well balanced. I'm also going to say, because I would be a hypocrite if I didn't, it is about everything in moderation. So I've talked with nutritionists about, how they juggle, we call it like the 80-20 rule. So they've mentioned to me it's the 80-20 rule. So you want to have 80% of your food needs to be good quality nutrition. But, we are all human, and to say, that we're not going to have ice cream or a cookie here and there, or a piece of chocolate is just not realistic. So that's why I always end with, we are human, it's okay to just have a well-balanced diet, have that 80-20 rule, but just don't make sure that 20 becomes 50 or 80, but we're human. It's no problem to go and have an ice cream or a cookie or a piece of chocolate. We're youth, it's nice, it's fun to eat, but just making sure that it's well balanced. So that's all I had today. Is there any questions? I do see some chats come up, so I'm just gonna stop my share. If you have any questions, my email is here, my phone number, you can call me, I don't mind. And then I'm on social media. If you want to follow, my personal account is Coach KP10. And then I also have my own business, which is Athletes Excel, which we kind of post more educational things on training. So any questions? And yeah, there's my contact information. If you can't think of a question now and want to ask me later. But thanks, guys. I hope that was informative. I've got some questions. Okay, so give you an example of a snack. So there are tons of different snacks that one can choose. So for me, examples would be raw vegetables and hummus, Greek yogurt with granola, topped with dried fruit. Apple with a peanut butter or other type of nut butter, dried fruits, nuts, half a bagel with a nut butter, cheese cubes with crackers, homemade granola bars. Yeah, those are you want to kind of stay away from high sugar and most pre-packaged snacks because they're pretty high in sugar. And you want to try and choose one that's carbohydrates or protein. So I hope that answers that question from that piece. Yeah, so another question is what should they eat if they're not enough time to have a meal 3 hours before, like an early morning game? Yeah, that's a really good question. So what I would tend to do is probably have a pretty big carbohydrate dense in the evening, and then choose a kind of high carbohydrate meal, when you can. So for me, it would be toast with avocado or some sort of cereal and milk. You can also do. It all depends also on the athlete. Like if you have a hard time breaking down food, or you feel that you're going to be sick if you have too much food before a game, I would definitely then suggest maybe some sort of smoothie that's easily digestible, that still has all the correct, macro and micronutrients that can happen. Next one, during halftime, water and a snack. What kind of snack is best? So definitely water and definitely a snack. So a snack from halftime, you want something that has high glycemic, it's really absorbable. So actually, like we used to have gummy bears or some sort of like sugar that can kind of quickly put into your body, that allows you to just last for that second half. So some sort of maybe jube or gummy bear that just helps top off that. Also, like fruit, like oranges and apples have been around for years, and many people have done that piece as well. But I definitely do both water and a snack. Okay, another good question. Having a plant-based diet beneficial to performance? That's a really good question. So there's been some interesting, there was a good documentary that came out in Netflix about specifically to this. I forget what the name is called. My personal opinion, and I'm not a nutritionist or a sports dietitian here. I believe in a more well-balanced diet with regards to the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. If you're able to get that micronutrients after a plant-based diet, and it doesn't have an effect on your performance, then that's fine. But this is more personal opinion. And I don't have the answer. But for me, it's more a question of having that more well-based meal that incorporates all those micronutrients, and making sure that those are included to aid in all those different types of means for performance. So yeah. Good. Okay, I've got another question coming through. I love it. I have to play 2 back-to-back games. What should I eat between? So similar probably from the first game is just those snack suggestions that I suggested. So vegetables and hummus, something that's easily digestible. Again, sometimes the smoothie option is always good because that's easily to go down. It doesn't come back up again if you're exerting pretty high, but those types of things I would try and get into, because they can add to like the fuel gauge. Again, you want to try and top up. So I would suggest maybe some sort of smoothie if you have back-to-back games. Potentially, if you've got that, then during halftime, have a bit of a bigger snack. So that, again, it's all a question of having that fuel gauge going back up. Hopefully that answers your questions. Bananas are good as a snack. Definitely bananas are good as a snack. They're high in potassium, so that aids with the muscle. Potassium is one of those key elements that helps with muscle contraction. So eating a banana is definitely a good snack for sure, and it's easy digestible as well. It's not dry in the throat as you're eating that. So a banana is, it's definitely a good snack for sure. Great questions, guys. I love this. Is there any other ones that anyone wants to ask? That's good. Those are great questions. I can send you those snack ideas as well. I'll just maybe send Andrea just a list of different snack options that can be good for those sorts of questions, especially those that have back-to-back games or stuff like that of what best to eat. I'll send all those options and forward those on to Andrea. But yeah, that's all I had today. Oh, there's other questions. What are the best muscle groups to train to prevent knee injury? Oh, okay, good one. So basically, I'm assuming like knee injury, you're thinking like ACL and that type of element, or Osgood Slatters, maybe if it's a growth related injury. So muscle groups that you want to try and help there is females. We tend to be weak in our posterior chain, and our posterior chain is our glutes and our hamstrings predominantly. And so we tend, as females, tend to be quad dominant. And so we need to make sure that we have good, strong glutes and we have good, strong hamstrings will help balance that quad dominant factor out. So in regards to best muscle groups, those would be glutes, hamstrings, and quads would be kind of the main area. Glutes help kind of stabilize your hips and help support kind of the base, and hamstrings and quads just help with kind of the dynamics of the movements. I would also suggest when looking at prevention, prevention, you can never really prevent an injury. They happen, but you can reduce the chances of them happening with proper training. I would say one of the big things for like knee injury is actually working on your landing mechanics and the change of direction. So where your foot is placed when you change your direction, how you absorb the force. So when you're a lot of knee injuries happen when you're changing direction. Your foot gets stuck one way and your knee goes the other. So being able to have those, what we call motor recruitment coordination all linked up is a really important factor from that side of things. So making sure that you work on landing mechanics, change of direction, and then supporting it with the strength of the posterior chain and the quads. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, they're coming in. After an injury, when should we start training again? Should we start when the pain is minimal or wait? So this is a really interesting one. So it all obviously depends on the injury, but one of the most biggest hurdles that what happens is when someone returns the injury is that they're feeling good, the muscles may be healed or healthy, but what happens is that we call what's called training load. So you instead of you need to gradually return to play. So the easiest way that I can explain that is that if you've been cleared by the medical practitioner, the physio, and said yes, you're good to go, then I would advise on like slowly increments of increasing your volume back. So if you're for a game, for example, so you've been cleared by the physio, so instead of going in and playing all the game for the entire team, that's probably when you're probably going to have a re-injury, because your body and that injured muscles is not used to that amount of volume or that stress. So it's about periodizing and that return. So the first game, maybe you only play, like you do the warm up and you play 10 minutes. Then the next weekend, okay, you do the warm up, now you add 15 or 20 minutes. And so you slowly start to build your tolerance so that muscle, that injury has chance to, get used to that load. So there's no perfect time of when to return. It all depends on you as the player and how your body recovers. But the one thing I would suggest is just don't go from 0 to hero right away if you have, no pain or is minimal. Like, I actually would advise, if you still got pain, you're actually not ready to return. That's just going to be another cause for another injury. So if you've got any sort of pain, you're not ready, or even minimal pain. It's all about being pain-free when you return, in my opinion. But good question. I sometimes get pain in my hip flexors. Are there any pregame stretches training that would be good for that? Great question. Yeah, so hip flexors is a big one with hockey, and especially with actually, students and athletes, because the majority of our day we're spent sitting down, and then we're also playing a sport which is crunched over. So for me, one of the big things is making sure that you have a mobility and flexibility routine that you're doing, almost daily. So good hip flexor stretches, which I can send some over to Andrea to provide just some demonstrations, but it's your, I call them Spider-Mans. So you're opening up, one foot is behind, the other foot is straight behind, the other foot is in front, and you drop the back knee down to the floor and then reach out. It's a bit of a yoga pose, but make sure you kind of do add that daily to kind of make sure that your hip flexors are loose and mobile. The other element would be sometimes with tight hip flexors is actually because you have tight quads or tight hamstrings, and the quads and hamstrings are pulling down on your hip flexor. So if you have a foam roller, then definitely implement that into your daily routine of rolling out your quads and your hamstrings, just to release those muscle knots that may have happened throughout your training. And then probably if you have them during a game, I would say you must maybe just need a little bit more a longer warm up. Just maybe your body that just needs to be a little bit better warmed up prior to the team warm-up. So you might just need to get to the field a little bit earlier, maybe do some glute activations to make sure you're not utilizing your hip flexors, you're utilizing more, your glutes are warmed up to support that. So I hope that helps. What are some good exercises to strengthen your ankles? Good question. So for this one, really easy ones is if you just grab like a band, and if this is my foot, you put a band around it, and you just, you can call it dorsiflex your foot and flex your foot backwards. And then you also put the band on this side and resist it to the right, and on this side and resist it to the left. Those are kind of some basic strengthening exercises there. I would also probably work on what we call proprioception. So working on just single leg balance. So standing on one leg and then moving your other leg. So this is my standing leg, and then moving your other leg in different planes. So your proprioceptions and your smaller muscles in your foot are kind of working hard to stabilize. And then progression from there is just looking at some like more dynamic. So single leg hops, side-to-side hops, just to make sure that, again, it's all about the proprioception and stabilizers. So I hope that answered your question. Next one, how can you train to last longer during the game and not get tired as quickly? Oh, it's a big one. So we're talking about that your aerobic engine. So that takes time to build. So there's a couple things that you can do to help with that system. So specifically, I would mix up your training. So I would do longer intervals. So interval training could be, you run at a good pace, like a game pace for 4 minutes, and then you rest for 3 to 4 minutes, and then you go again. That'll help with, and you do that maybe 4 times. That will help with that kind of making sure you're running at a good tempo pace, but also have enough recovery in between so you can continue to run that. So that would be longer intervals to help with that aerobic system. And then also probably like a steady state run as well. So I always, when I plan for my hockey players, I have 3 kind of main sessions. I do a longer interval based ones because field hockey is an intermittent sport. So that's, being able to recover and then go again quite hard. I also have a speed one, and then I also do some sort of tempo or steady state run of about anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes is kind of the element of at a good steady state pace. So anything from, probably no more. I mean, back in the day, we used to run 10Ks, but now looking at the research, there's no point running a 10K. It's just added load and stress to your body. So try and between maybe that 5 and 7K mark, in my opinion, for this age group. I hope that answered your question there. Great questions, guys. This is awesome. I love it. Is there, I hope that answered your question. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to ask? I'm not sure, we're a little bit longer, I think, than maybe what anticipated, but it's great. I don't think any more are coming through. All right, well, yeah, that's all I had.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. That was great. That was Awesome. And thank you so much for everybody for getting involved and asking all of the questions. I hope that helped. And yeah, thank you very much, Kate. And we will be in touch in the next few days with some hopefully exciting news for when we can get back onto the field.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learned something from there. And yeah, feel free to get in touch. If you have any other questions that come to you later, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Kate.